motions to look at. Just very briefly, want to inform everyone, we had hoped to have the PBO here on Tuesday. Unfortunately, Indu beat us to the invite, so it's exact same time, 3:30 Tuesday. I suspect due to the short time period and also because of the speaker vote on Tuesday, we're not going to get the PBO. We may not have a meeting anyways because of the speaker vote and delays. And we may not have time for subsequent witnesses. So I'm guessing, only a guess right now, probably 75% chance we may not have a Tuesday meeting. I'll let everyone know as soon as I know and as soon as we know. But just kind of an FYI for planning. Ms. Cusi, then Ms. Vignola. Go ahead, Ms. Cusi, please.
Thank you very much, Chair. And, this is a very grave motion that I bring forward to the committee here today, Mr. Chair and committee members, because we all know what happened, but it happened. We know what happened, but it happened. And we have a choice now. We have a choice to move forward. We can do that. We can choose that today. We can choose to move forward. We can choose to begin the healing of the pain that was caused in the House of Commons last Friday. And that healing begins with finding out what happened. How did this occur? How in God's name did this occur? And we in the House are not the only ones left wondering how this happened. Our Jewish brothers and sisters are reeling as to the mere possibility of this event passing. And I have here a letter from the Friends of Simon Wiesenthal. The fact that a veteran who served in a Nazi military unit was invited to and given a standing ovation in Parliament is shocking. At a time of rising anti-Semitism and Holocaust distortion, it is incredibly disturbing to see Canada's Parliament rise to applaud an individual who was a member of the unit in the Waffen-SS, a Nazi military branch, responsible for the murder of Jews and others, and that was declared a criminal organization during the Nuremberg trials. There should be no confusion that this unit was responsible for the mass murder of innocent civilians with a level of brutality and malice that is unimaginable. An apology is owed to every Holocaust survivor and veteran of the Second World War who fought the Nazis. And I want committee members to listen to this part. And an explanation must be provided as to how this individual entered the hallowed halls of Canadian Parliament and received recognition from the Speaker of the House and a standing ovation. So our Jewish brothers and sisters are reeling at even the possibility of how this could happen. Those who fought alongside us are wondering if their sacrifices were for naught and the alliances were for naught. The world is wondering, how did this happen? And in the words of my speaker, Pierre Poilievre, Canada will have to wear this forever, forever. But we have an opportunity here today. We have an opportunity and we have an obligation. Mr. Chair, the horrible thing has happened and we can't change what happened. We can't even change it, even if we want to change it, but we can't change it. But we have an opportunity and an obligation that, by God, this never, ever happens again. Never, ever. And I encourage every single member of this committee to consider what it means to deny this opportunity to Canadians, to Holocaust survivors, and to the world to find out what happened. And I don't want to hear excuses. I don't want to hear that the speaker should be on the list, because guess what? We can add the speaker to the list. We can amend the list of agencies I put forward to add the speaker to the list. I have no problem at all. I would actually be very interested to hear from the former speaker as to what vetting processes he and his staff went through for this tragedy to occur. I'm hearing excuses like it should go through the House Procedures Committee. The House Procedures Committee is currently seized with foreign interference as a result of the House of Commons asking to look into it. They are seized with that right now. Government operations has the flexibility has the ability to be nimble, to look at any issue when it is pressing, immediately to turn our resources, our energies, and our efforts to do that. And we should do so in this case. In this case, which has brought embarrassment not only to the nation, but to Canada throughout the entire world. So I don't want to hear excuses. I'm asking everyone here today, we have an opportunity to begin to move forward, to start the healing, and we can make that choice. Every single one of us on this committee can make this choice today to start that healing process, Mr. Chair. So, Mr. Chair, with that, I'll read my motion into the record, please. Given the international embarrassment created by the Liberal government by allowing a former soldier of a Nazi military unit in World War II to attend and be recognized with an ovation during the President of Ukraine's special address to Parliament on Friday, September 22nd, and that proper vetting was neither done nor was completed, and this individual's military record was ignored, the committee dedicates 6 meetings holding hearing into this matter, and the committee hear from the following witnesses: the Department of Foreign Affairs, Trade and Development Diplomatic Protocol, Royal Canadian Mounted Police, Canadian Security Intelligence Service, Parliamentary Protective Service, the House of Commons Sergeant at Arms, the House of Commons International and Interparliamentary Affairs, the Privy Council Office, and the Prime Minister's Office. So, Mr. Chair, I will leave my motion there. The world is watching. We have the opportunity today, every single one of us on this committee, to make the choice to start the healing process and find out exactly, precisely what happened so that it never, ever happens again. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Cusi. I'll start a list. I have Ms. Vignola, then Mr. Genuis. Ms. Vignola.
I will have to speak again later. What happened Friday was outrageous. I agree. We should never have been invited to stand in those circumstances. It's important to understand what happened and exactly how this person was invited to enter the chamber and how we can avoid a similar situation in the future. Nobody in the House would have stood to applaud a Nazi or a former Nazi. Nobody would have stood for this person. This individual should never have been invited into the House and should not have been honored in the way that he was honored. Despite what my colleague says, however, it's not an excuse to say House procedure has to validate House procedure. Of course, the House has to examine its own way of working and its own protocols. When it comes to our committee, we have to look at our schedule. We have 7 or 8 studies that are still unfinished, and I don't believe we should set those aside. Now, my suggestion, and we can discuss this, I would suggest that we set aside the debate and perhaps ask the chair to send a letter to PROC to study this motion. Now, it's not up to me to say no and to sweep it aside. I think it should be studied, but it should be studied in the right committee, at the right committee, rather.
So I'm not sure if it's the translation. The clerk is asking, are you moving a motion to adjourn this motion? Or to adjourn this motion? Okay. Is that what you got? Okay,
Those are two separate things, though. A motion
Yes.
to adjourn debate.
yes. And then we can back.
She was speaking, and if she had while she had the floor said she moved it, but she didn't say while she had the floor that she moved it, and she can get the floor again and move it at that point. But I have the floor first.
No, I was asking, I understood what Ms. Vignola said. The clerk looked over to me to ask if we were adjourning it. I asked to clarify because of the translation. And so I'm asking if it was a motion to adjourn this debate. And
Just point of order, Chair. I think the member. I was looking at the translation as well. I think what the member said was that we should send a letter to Proc, which would be a different, a different substantive motion, and again, a member, if the member has the floor, has a right to move a motion to adjourn debate. But if a member says that we should send a letter and then cedes the floor, I would very much like to speak to this motion, and someone can get on the list after me and move adjournment to debate. But I do think we should have an opportunity to have some discussion of this. But in any event, I don't think the member moved the motion while she had the floor. She said we should send a letter, which is a different matter. Okay. That's on a point of order.
Ms. Vignola, quickly, then I will discuss this.
Alors, j'ai proposé, je vais redire les mêmes mots, j'ai proposé qu'on...
I will repeat what I said. I propose that we adjourn this debate to think about asking the chair to send a letter to send the motion to Proc. So I moved that we adjourn the debate. First and foremost, I am moving a motion to adjourn the debate.
Just on the point of order, Chair, the member had to say it while she had the floor, and I don't think she has the floor anymore.
Yeah, just the way it was said, and I understand the intent, and normally we would just vote on the intent because of the way the committee has operated. The condition, putting condition on it brings up for debate. Why don't we hear from Mr. Genues, then we can go back to Mrs. Vignola and she can clarify what you want. Unless, Mr. Johns, you wanted to chime in as well after Mr. Genues?
You're the chair.
I'm asking you. So Mr. Genues, then Mrs. Vignola, then yourself.
Yes, just leave it like that.
Why don't you have your say, Mr. Genues, and then we can go back to Mrs. Vignola. And then Mr. Kusmirchuk after Mr. John.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you, Chair. And I obviously the majority of the committee will have its will, but I hope that we have an opportunity to at least have some discussion here today, because I think there's a lot of important points that need to be aired on this. So I wanted to just start by sharing a little bit of personal context, and that is I haven't spoken on this issue yet, but it's personal for me. My grandmother was a Holocaust survivor, and I share in the shock about what happened on Friday. I personally wasn't here when it happened, so I only found out about it afterwards. And so for me, growing up, knowing about the Holocaust and World War II was obviously really important. It was a part of my family's history as well as world history. And my parents always emphasized the importance of knowing about history, of how learning about history is how we avoid repeating it, how we learn from the mistakes of history, and how it's especially important for us to learn about these darker moments in our collective history, so that we can prevent these grave evils from repeating themselves. And the promise that was made to my grandmother's generation, the promise of never again, of not allowing genocides to happen in the future, is one that we have obviously failed to deliver on. We have rising anti-Semitism around the world, including here in Canada. And by my count, there have been 4 instances in the time I've been a member of Parliament where this House has recognized contemporaneous acts of genocide. So we know genocide continues. And this, again, just underlines the importance of knowing world history, of knowing our history, and having that inform the decisions that our institutions make. and one of the things about this that's so shocking to me is that we have a whole apparatus of government that is responsible for security, for protocol, for ensuring the success of these visits. And for any of the people involved in this process, it should just not have passed the basic smell test, like the basic description of who this individual was, someone who fought against Russia during the Second World War. That should not have passed a basic smell test. That should have led to any number of the people in the RCMP protocol, the Prime Minister's office, all of those that were involved in this visits to ask more questions about it. And there's a whole painful history in this country of conflict around people who came to Canada who had been members of the Waffen-SS, and so for people to not have known that history. And I think we need to underline that the Prime Minister is ultimately responsible for this apparatus. The RCMP, the House of Commons Security reports to the RCMP. There are this is and this is, I think this is important from a process perspective, because I understand that some members want to say this isn't a government operations issue. This is a procedure and House affairs issue. And I agree with my colleague who said, the Procedure and House Affairs Committee is already seized with the issue of foreign interference, and pushing this over to Procedure and House Affairs is a way of, I think, frankly, trying to bury the discussion of it. But moreover, this isn't just a question of procedure and House activities. This is a question of the operations of government, and as such, we need to be looking at the Operations Committee, and it suits the framing of some members who want to avoid looking at the responsibility of the government and government operations for this outcome by saying no, it's just the House of Commons. But this was a state visit. The House of Commons is used for these kinds of addresses, but formally speaking, the House of Commons isn't sitting. We have people on the floor that are not members of Parliament. We understand this, that formally speaking, the House doesn't sit. We have a foreign leader addressing the House within the House of Commons. But this very much, I think, raises important questions of government operations. How did this happen from a government operations perspective? So when members say, let's put it over as a procedure and House issue, it's not a procedure and House issue fundamentally. It is more fundamentally a government operations issue, and we need to be able to ask those government operations questions, which I think includes looking at how there was such historical ignorance within the processes that were ultimately, I think, responsible to the Prime Minister and the government. Such ignorance of the debates that have happened in Canada around the Waffen-SS and of the history of the Holocaust itself. Chair, the sad thing is that we're living through a time when the term Nazi is regularly thrown around as a political insult, apparently by people who don't seem to have a basic understanding and recollection of the history of Nazism. This is deeply troubling, and it contributes, I think, to the concern about what happened last Friday. I wanted to put on the record as well, it's important to underline what we're talking about in terms of the Waffen-SS. Some articles have referred to the person who was in the House as being someone who fought for or fought alongside Nazi Germany, and this grossly understates the full picture. The SS was the paramilitary unit of the Nazi Party, personally loyal to Hitler. The SS was not just a unit within the German army. It was a paramilitary organization of the Nazi Party, personally loyal to Hitler. It was deployed in all kinds of the most horrific, unimaginable atrocities. And it was used as a personal vehicle for exercising power. It was there in part so that if there was agitation against the regime from within the army, that the SS could be deployed that was personally loyal to the Nazi Party and to Hitler. This is of course historically important because we knew as a result of the Valkyrie plot that there was agitation within the German military. The SS was deeply evil and was responsible for some of the most horrific atrocities in human history. And this is the case of an individual who voluntarily enlisted with the SS in 1943. Again, chose to enlist with the SS in 1943. And my colleague referenced the Nuremberg trials, and I just want to share a number of quotes from the Nuremberg trials to understand what we're talking about here. It is impossible to single out any portion of the SS which was not involved in these criminal activities. The tribunal finds that knowledge of these criminal activities was sufficiently general to justify declaring that the SS was a criminal organization to the extent hereinafter described. Going on, there is evidence that the shooting of unarmed prisoners of war was the general practice in some Waffen-SS divisions. Units of the Waffen-SS and Einsatzgruppe operating directly under the SS main office were used to carry out these plans. These units were also involved in the widespread murder and ill treatment of the civilian population of occupied territories under the guise of combating partisan units. Units of the SS exterminated Jews and people deemed politically undesirable by the SS, and their reports record the execution of enormous numbers of persons. Waffen-SS divisions were responsible for many massacres and atrocities in occupied territories, such as the massacres at Oradour and Ladice. So, Chair, again, we have a situation in which the term Nazi is increasingly thrown around as a political insult on Twitter and social media and other places, even by political leaders. But we have, I think, a declining understanding of what of the horrors of this period, of the roots and causes of this totalitarian evil, and I would commend to all members of the public just the importance of understanding history and understanding this period in particular as we commit ourselves to the principle of never again. And as the Government Operations Committee, we need to understand what happened as a matter of government operations. If members want to make the case that the Prime Minister is not responsible or that that government operations are not associated with what happened, then they can make that case. But let's not bury it. Let's not hide it. Let's not pretend that there aren't operations of government questions that need to be asked and considered. So now is not the time for excuses or punting it to other committees. Government operations is the place to do it, and it's because it's a government operations issue as well as because of the issues that are already on the table at Procedure and House Affairs. So I hope that members will consider this reality and take a stand for remembering and learning from history, getting to the bottom of what happened, and holding powerful people accountable for this grave stain on our national reputation. Thank you.
Thanks. Before you start, Mrs. Vignola, just we are still speaking actually on your amendment, which is to adjourn and write the letter asking Proc to do it. And that will continue until there is no one else on the speaking list. So I'm not sure if Mr. Johns and Mr. Irick wish to speak on that still, which is to adjourn and write the letter to Proc. But it was
Clarification?
Yeah.
Clarification only. I think we're speaking on the motion to adjourn first. No, they're together, grouped in? It's one. Okay, well, if it's a motion to adjourn, then it goes to a vote.
Adjourn and write the letter, which is debatable. This is the direction from the clerk I'm receiving.
I can clarify on a point of order, Chair, if that's helpful.
Unless we have consent to have Ms. Vignola withdraw that amendment.
Letter?
But because it was adjourn, write the letter and adjourn, that becomes it not just the straight adjournment, which would force us to go straight to a vote on it.
Donc, la motion que j'ai demandé,
The motion that I wanted to move was to adjourn the debate, to think about the idea. I didn't say that in the motion there should be a proposal to write a letter. It was to reflect on this idea of sending this elsewhere. I wanted a motion to adjourn the debate, period. So if it's considered that my motion was to think about sending this to Proc, then I would like to withdraw it. Please don't put words in my mouth. Thank you.
Okay. Basically, we require UC from the committee to withdraw that. I assume we have that, colleagues? Withdraw the whole thing. Just withdraw the whole thing. Fine.
I'm sorry, to clarify, to withdraw, the whole, what's the whole thing?
Adjourn the debate on your motion
Okay.
and write the letter.
Okay.
So
she's
we
adjourning
have
all of that?
UC
Or, excuse me,
withdrawn
withdrawing
that.
Pardon me.
We've-
Okay, yeah, sure,
right.
that's fine. Yeah.
Now, Ms. Vignola, you have the floor again. You should put up your hand, and then we can get to Mr. Johns. Mr. Kazmierczak, looks like you've not even put down your hand. Go ahead, Ms. Vignola.
étant donné qu'on a retiré la
Since we have withdrawn this pseudo motion with two elements, I would like to now table a motion to adjourn the debate. Thank you.
Thank you, and I realize that was the original intent, but procedure being procedure, we had to follow that, so thank you. So we'll just go to a quick vote for adjourning the debate on the motion, on Ms. Kusi's motion. We'll do a recorded division.
Mr. Juari,
Support.
Ms. Atwin,
In favor?
Mr. Baines.
In favor.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Kuzmierczak,
Support.
Mr. Souza,
In favor.
Ms. Block,
No.
Mr. Jennis,
No.
Ms. Kuzi,
Opposed.
Madame Vignola,
pour.
Mr. Johns.
Yes.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you for your patience,
3 yeas.
colleagues. So that motion is adjourned. Mr. Johns, so we'll start a new speaking
Okay,
order
I want to
with
move
Mr.
that,
Johns.
just to follow up.
Sorry, 2 seconds. Mr. Jennings, did you have your hand up? No. Okay,
I just said shame.
okay, that's
but
fair.
that's,
Mr. Johns?
We all want the same thing here. We want accountability for what happened and to make sure it never happens again. This is important to every member at this committee. It's absolutely critical, and I think Ms. Vignola was going on that thread absolutely. What we want to do is make sure that this goes in the right place. And PROC, it's very clear in terms of their mandate that the Procedure and House Affairs Committee
Point
studies
of
and
order,
reports.
Mr. Chair.
Ms. Block, go ahead. Sorry, Mr. Johns.
Thank you very much. Just a point of clarification. If a motion to adjourn the debate passed, is it your intention that we continue on with the debate as it appears Mr. Johns is doing?
No, the motion is adjourned. We open up the floor for speaking order. My assumption is that we were going to go to motions, but Mr. Johns is addressing something else, perhaps following up on Ms. Vignola's suggestion that we write to PROC about this, if I'm guessing right, but I'll let Mr. Johns continue.
Absolutely. That's exactly where I want to go in support of the spirit of what Ms. Kuzi's brought here today, what this committee wants, everybody wants, and that's to make sure that this is looked at and that it's done properly, that there's accountability. We find out what happened, what went wrong, where the gaps are, and to fix it so it never, ever happens again. And we need to make sure it lands at PROC to ensure that is the role of PROC. The whole role of PROC is to ensure that the internal administration of the House and services and facilities for MPs is run with proper rules and practices that protect the House and the members, so that something like this, something terrible like this and shameful like this never happens again. So I move that we write a letter to PROC asking them to do a study on this, and that they, I don't think we should tell PROC who.
Long, can we just agree that we will write, the chair will.
I don't think we should determine to PROC who they should invite and how many meetings they should have, but that we want this to be their top priority in terms of, we know they're undergoing a lot of really difficult studies, and it is a challenging job. As much as this committee, we have 8 studies going here as well. I want to make sure that we get this to PROC and that we write in the letter that this is an absolute priority of this committee, that we ask PROC to take this on and they study this urgently. So that would be what I'd be calling. So given the international embarrassment created, by the Speaker of the House of Commons, by allowing a former soldier of a Nazi military unit in World War II to attend and be recognized during the President of Ukraine's special address to Parliament on Friday, September 22nd, and that proper vetting was either not done or this individual's military record was ignored, that the committee dedicate, that the PROC committee hold hearings to look into this matter, and that the PROC committee hear witnesses to ensure that this never happens again, and they provide that they update their rules and regulations when it comes to vetting of guests attending, a visitation of any foreign dignitary.
Yeah, and I apologize, I missed a bit of what you were saying. Like, just to be clear, we cannot direct, we can only suggest other committees.
So
I
the
missed
preamble
but
at
I
the
missed
beginning, I would say
I
would
missed the
be-
verb of what you were.
Yeah, that we recommend to the to PROC due to the rest of what I outlined, which is very similar to what Ms. Kuzi put forward. We're talking about a few words.
Okay, Mr. Jenis?
I want a point of order before I speak, and could I ask the clerk to read out the motion as she understands it, so that we're sure we're debating the same thing?
I would sincerely appreciate if Mr. Johns could just reiterate it. I could give you what I have, but it is, Mr. Johns moved that the committee, that the chair of the committee of OGO write to the committee chair of PROC to recommend that PROC study and alter the rules. So I would really appreciate some assistance filling in the blanks.
So the only changes I would make on Ms. Kuzi's motion is that, the preamble is that we're writing to PROC, and that we recommend that PROC given, and then keep the first part different. I would cross out Liberal government and put by the Speaker of the House of Commons, because it was the Speaker, by allowing, and then the rest I would continue on as stated in Ms. Kuzi's motion. If I can read it if you'd like.
Unfortunately, we adjourned debate on that motion, so you can't.
This is writing a letter. So this is different motion because it's not on this motion. It's actually drafting a letter to PROC. So it's different than the motion, which is to have a study here, and it is very different. It's actually writing a letter recommending that PROC consider doing a study, given the international embarrassment, and the rest we could use. I would take out only a couple of lines different than Ms. Kuzi put forward in her preamble in terms of the recommendations around the letter. And I can't see it being, it's very different than what was just put forward in terms of the motion before was to do a study. This is a motion to write a letter to another committee, which should be allowable.
Chair, just a point of order. My my suggestion. Mr. John says the floor and he has a right to move a motion, but it does seem that there's some uncertainty about the text of the motion. I don't want us to delay a lot of time, but I might suggest a 5-minute recess so that we can actually have the text and know what we're debating.
Please suspend for 5 minutes. We'll suspend. Mr. Johns, if you want to start again, please. Mr. Johns, you have the floor. Go ahead, please.
Thank you for your patience, everybody. And really like to see that we're trying to work together to get through this. Given the international embarrassment, I'm going to move a motion that given the international embarrassment created by the Speaker of the House by allowing a former soldier of a Nazi military unit in World War II to attend and be recognized during the President of Ukraine's special address to Parliament on Friday, September 22nd, and that proper vetting was either not done or this individual's military record was ignored, that the chair of OGO write to PROC to suggest they hold hearings to look into this matter and to ensure that there are safeguards in place so that this never happens again.
Alex, did everyone hear that okay? You have the wording correct?
I don't want to require to be read another
Garnett?
time, but
Mr. Genos, yes, sir.
sorry, point of order. Can it be distributed in writing? Is that available or?
We don't have it.
Okay, I'm sorry. Could it be read one more time? Then that should
Sure.
be,
How about if I have our clerk read it out?
'Cause I will propose some amendments as well.
Okay.
Go ahead.
I'm just going to read it a bit slowly so that the interpreters who don't have the text can keep up with me. Given the international embarrassment created by the Speaker of the House of Commons by allowing a former soldier of a Nazi military unit in World War II to attend and be recognized during the President of Ukraine's special address to Parliament on Friday, September 22nd, and that proper vetting was either not done or this individual's military record was ignored, that the chair of the Standing Committee on Government Operations and Estimates write to the Standing Committee on Procedure and House Affairs to suggest that they hold hearings to look into this matter to ensure that there are safeguards in place so that this never happens again. Is that correct, sir?
Mr. Genos?
Okay, so at a broad level, I do want to underline that I think it is somewhat absurd for our committee to decide not to study something and then to say that we're going to write to another committee to tell them what a great priority it is and great priority it should be for them, but we're not going to study it ourselves. I think, I don't want to speculate on the motives of specific people, but I think the effect of sending this to PROC is that PROC will have to contend with the foreign interference issue and the privilege issue involving threats to Mr. Chong's family. That is also an urgent priority. We'll have to contend with how to balance multiple different matters, one of which it has been directed by the House to look at. And I also think it's clear from this motion that there is continually an effort to position this as a procedure and House and Speaker issue as opposed to a government operations issue. And that is about taking accountability away from the Prime Minister and the government who oversees security in the House. And again, to underline, like the standing orders don't apply when we have foreign visitors addressing the House. Members can go back and look at the record of how foreign visits come about. The House decides not to sit on that particular day. And the fact that the House is not sitting then allows an address by, in this case, President Zelensky, in other cases, other foreign leaders. But every time this has happened, it has not been a formal session of the House of Commons governed by the standing orders. If a member tried to raise a point of order during those proceedings, they would not be able to because the House is not sitting. there are senators, but also many members of the public that are on the floor during that time. So to suggest that this is a procedural issue and not a government operations issue, to suggest that all the fault belongs on the chosen scapegoat, I think is missing the point, and to suggest that we're solving this by sending a letter to another committee. That said, I do want this study to happen. I think the study is really important. So I guess we have to make a determination about whether to say this is better than nothing. But I would say it's not that far from nothing. But I'm going to propose I think a couple amendments to try to beef up the motion a little bit. So the first amendment I will propose is in the middle of the motion. It refers to suggesting that PROC study this. I'd like to amend it to suggest that they create a subcommittee to hold hearings, and then it would continue as otherwise. The creation of a subcommittee to do this work would allow the study to begin right away, and would spare PROC, if they decide to go down this road, of needing to determine whether to do this or foreign interference. I think members may say that's for them to decide, but since we're sending them a letter, right? I think we should provide that recommendation, and of course it's as non-binding as any other recommendation that would come from this committee, which underlines my sort of overall frustration with this method. But I will propose that amendment initially, which I think substantially improves the motion because it solves one problem with it. Thanks. Yeah, I have one or two other amendments that I've got to sort of flesh out, but I'll put this one on the table first.
Really quickly, the mandate for PROC, it cites that the Procedure and House Affairs Committee studies and reports on the rules and practices of the House and its committees, electoral matters, questions of privilege, MP conflicts of interest, internal administration of the House, and services and facilities for MPs. So this is their mandate. This is why I'm recommending it, is to make sure it goes to the right place. I'm not trying to say that we shouldn't do this. I want this study, actually. I think that we're very supportive of getting to the bottom of this. We want accountability. In terms of the amendment, in terms of the subcommittee, I think I like the idea. And I think that if Mr. Jenius would consider just, if necessary, even before the subcommittee to expedite a study, something to that effect would be welcome, just because we want to demonstrate to PROC, obviously, that this is urgent, and if they don't have the capacity, a committee, that they create the subcommittee. So I support fully what he's doing with the sub-amendment.
Are you moving an amendment to his amendment?
I hope it's a friendly. I hope it's a
Okay.
friendly.
I think Mr. Genuis had some other changes, so perhaps if he's fine with that, he can adopt that at the same time. But before we go to Mr. Genuis, Mr. Kuzmierczuk, you had your hand up? Were you talking Mr. Gord's?
Yes,
Mr.
thank you,
Jones?
Chair. I mean, there seems to be agreement on the floor here, but I would just urge caution that that we not direct PROC in terms of its internal deliberations. It understands this issue very well, understands the processes very well. I like Mr. John's original motion. It's very simple. It's very clear. It communicates very clearly the urgency of this and the importance of this matter to the OGO committee, but it allows their committee to determine on its own how best to proceed. So I would say that that the original motion that Mr. Johns put on the floor, I think it's crisp, it's clear, and it allows PROC to determine the how. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Genuis.
Yeah, Chair, formally, there's no such thing as a friendly amendment, but I'm comfortable with Mr. John's proposed sub-amendment, which I understood him to have moved. Of course, this motion empowers you to write the letter as you see fit, and I think the goal of the amendment and the sub-amendment is to capture the idea that that respecting the importance of the work they're doing on foreign interference, that consideration of a subcommittee would be a recommendation, and you can turn those two pieces into an appropriate letter.
Thank you, colleagues. We seem fine with that. Your original comment was perhaps other. Are you?
Pass the sub-amendment and the amendment now by unanimous consent?
I think we're fine with that, colleagues.
Okay.
What are we actually voting on?
See if we're fine with the sub-amendment to the amendment, which is, yeah.
If necessary?
I think it was if necessary, not if possible, if necessary.
Okay, thank you.
For the creation of the subcommittee, to write, to suggest, not to direct or give orders to. Mr. Kuzmierczak?
Oh, thank you, Mr. Chair. Sorry, I do apologize. I thought we had agreement on that. My question to Mr. Johns as well too.
Are you, sorry to interrupt, are you commenting on the sub-amendment? Because we're hoping to see if we have an agreement to the sub-amendments.
No,
So we're
I'm
fine
not commenting on that. If you can come back to me after
I
that.
will. So we've accepted the sub-amendment. Mr. Janice, are you speaking on the sub-amendment?
The sub-amendment is accepted. I think we have accepted the
I'm
amendment
asking
as well.
that, but before I can even continue, you've got your hand up before we even close the sub-amendment. So we're fine with the sub-amendment, colleagues. Perfect. Thank you. Now we're back. Are we fine with the amendment and everything? We're fine with that, colleagues? Perfect. So with everyone's...
We're in the motion as amended.
Mr. Generous, go ahead.
Okay, so secondly, the language in our original motion said, given the international embarrassment created by the Liberal government, this was replaced in the proposed motion by Mr. John saying, given the international embarrassment created by the Speaker. I don't agree with his framing. I suspect he wouldn't agree with my framing. In the interest of consensus language, how about we amend it to say, given the international embarrassment created by allowing a former soldier of a Nazi. So essentially just taking out the giving of blame one way or the other. I think that just gets to something that we're all comfortable with.
Taking out by the Speaker, taking out by the government.
Yeah, just taking out by the Speaker. So it just reads, given the international embarrassment created by allowing a former. I think I don't think just trying to lay it at the Speaker's feet is accurate, but I'm not gonna propose what is obviously a minority view on who's responsible either. I think let's just, if we want to try to get to consensus, let's try to get there. So that's the amendment.
Mr. Kuzmierczak, so this is on Mr. Janice's just removing the word Speaker along with the original one, which was removing government.
Yeah, I disagree. I believe that Mr. Johns, again, I go back to his original intent and is including the fact that the words that it was caused by the Speaker, I believe, is the most accurate version of what transpired. And so I would prefer that we stick to that. But I do have one small amendment that I would like to propose as well. And I think it's a critical one.
Are you proposing a sub-amendment to Mr. Janice's amendment, or can we deal with Mr. Janice's amendment first and then you can propose your amendment?
We can deal with Mr. Janice's first, but I do hope, Mr. Chair, you come back to me.
I will consider your hand up. Does anyone else wish to speak on Mr. Janice's? And if you notice, every time I say Garnett's name, I pronounce his last name differently. So I hope you're all keeping track. I think I'm up to 9. Does anyone else wish to speak on Mr. Janice's amendment, which is basically removing Speaker and the original government? Mr. Johns?
I would prefer not to remove it, but if it's a pathway for us to getting through this, working collectively, I absolutely would support that because we need to work together here. And I think that is a way forward. And I think we need a pathway forward. We're sending a letter to Proc. Let them figure out what they want to do in terms of how they want to conduct this study. But we're encouraging them to move quickly on this. And I think that's generally what we're trying to agree on here. And I appreciate Ms. Kuzi bringing this forward because this is really important issue.
I
And we need Proc
appreciate
to make this an
that
important
compromise,
issue.
Mr. Johns. Can we go to a vote on Mr. Genois's amendment, please, which is, again, just taking out the word speaker, which, again, modified the original motion, which was taking out government. Madame Vignola.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. Chair. Just to be sure, we retrieve both speaker, juste pour être sûr, excusez-moi.
En français, s'il vous plaît.
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you. So just to be sure, we're removing speaker and we're also removing liberal government. Is that correct?
Amendment took out government, then was proposed to put in speaker. This amendment would just take out speaker, so we will not have speaker or government. It will just say, given the embarrassment created by allowing a former soldier. Colleagues, can we go to a vote on that? On division. Are we fine on division? Okay. I assume-
Recorded vote.
We'll do a
Chair.
recorded vote? Sure. We'll just, real quick, recorded vote, then I think we'll go to Mr. Kuzmierczak, please, after the vote. Madame?
Apologies, just labeling my vote correctly. We'll start with Mr. Jawari on the question
Oppose.
to remove the Speaker of the House of Commons from the vote.
Oppose?
Thank you, sir. Ms. Atwin?
Opposed?
Mr. Baines?
No.
Mr. Kuzmierczak?
No.
Mr. Souza?
Oppose.
Thank you. Ms. Block?
Yes.
Mr. Janice?
Yes.
Ms. Kuzi?
In favor.
Madame Viola?
En accord.
Mr. Johns?
Yes.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you. That amendment,
Sir,
5-4, the amendment
Five.
passes.
that's 5 yeas and 5 nays.
Oh, I apologize. Not only can I not pronounce Mr. Genis's name, I cannot count either. I will vote in favor.
Thank you, sir.
Thanks.
6-5.
6-5, I apologize. So the amendment passes. Mr. Kuzmierczak, I think, had an amendment. Then we will discuss that. Go ahead, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I understand the first line of the sentence as it currently stands of the motion is given the embarrassment. I would also move an amendment to add the word, friendly amendment, given the hurt and the embarrassment. Because again, fundamentally, it's important. The people that were hurt by this, be it Jews, Poles, other victims of Nazi atrocities. I think that is our driver, that we prevent such hurt from being repeated again. I think it's important that we include that word.
Thank you, sir. So we'll be given the embarrassment and hurt created, or I think created by
hurt and embarrassment.
Hurt and embarrassment. Yeah, I see everyone in agreement. Thank you, Mr. Kuzmierczak. I appreciate that.
Okay, there's the word internet.
Yeah, hurt and international embarrassment.
Thank you.
National.
And I've got one more amendment, last one.
And we have hopefully the last amendment to this.
Yeah, Mr. Chair, this is my last amendment. I'm going to propose that at the end of the motion, we add and report this motion to the House. The reason why I think that is important is we can send a letter to PROC, but a report to the House provides an opportunity for the House to pronounce itself on wanting this study to take place, and I think that may be important to ensure it happens. We don't want this issue buried. We want the study to happen, and a report to the House provides the opportunity for the House to express itself on the matter. That's why I think it's important, and I hope that will be agreeable to members. Thanks.
Mr. Johns, on this amendment?
You know me. I think every report should go to the House. So eventually. So I think this should be something we should all support.
Sure. Colleagues, anyone else, or can we agree to this? Wonderful.
Oh, Mr. Chair,
Yeah, go ahead, Mr. Kuzmierczuk.
can I ask for just a brief suspension, please, of the meeting?
5 minutes, fine, Mr.
Perfect, thank
Kuzmierczuk?
you.
Are you going to rush in 5 minutes? 5 minutes, colleagues.
Thank you.
Clarify the intent of your motion. My understanding is to report the motion to the House, not for proc, but could you just clarify, please?
Chair, sorry, it does seem there's some confusion. My proposal was to amend the motion by adding the words, and report this motion to the House, to the end of the motion, which, if it's not clear, has the effect of reporting this motion to the House, not simply of requesting that a subsequent report be done by another committee. The reason I think this is important is because when a committee reports a matter to the House, it provides the House an opportunity to pronounce itself on that matter. So clearly this would be a stronger approach than simply writing a letter to Proc. It would involve writing a letter to the Proc, but also informing the House that we'd written a letter to Proc and providing the House with an opportunity to pronounce itself on it. Now, another option would be we could add in a request for a government response, which means effectively you cannot do concurrence for 4 months. So if people are concerned about it being used as sort of a dilatory tactic, which, you could simply adding in the request for a government response would address that concern. I think that a letter is not good enough, which is what I said at the beginning, and I think informing the House of this is an important step to actually working to get to the bottom of the matter.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Johns?
I'm going to reiterate this is Proc's mandate, actually, to look at this. And so this is their job, and there's a reason why we don't have one giant committee, to cover everything. We have different mandates with different committees, and that's Proc's mandate. So, it's important that we send this letter. I think it's pretty clear we want them to do it with urgency. I don't want to see this turn into this letter tying up the House of Commons for hours on end, through concurrence. When we need, I think Proc's got the message. Like, this is a pretty clear message that our committee is saying, do your job. This is your job. This is your mandate. Do your job. So I won't support the amendment. I've supported your other two amendments, by the way, Mr. Jenius, and I think we need to get to the end here, and I'm hoping we can, because we're all supportive of the contents of the letter and what we're trying to do here and achieve. But I don't want this to become a tool of just something outside of the scope of our committee. Let's get this to Proc and highlight to Proc. We need them to take this on ASAP. And I really appreciate Mr. Jenius saying if they don't have the capacity because of foreign interference, that they start creating subcommittees if necessary to take this on and move this forward.
Thank you, Mr. Johns. I appreciate that. Can we move to perfect. Sounds like we can move to a vote on this sub-amendment. Do a recorded vote?
Yes.
Thank you.
On whether or not, and report this motion to the House be added to the motion currently before the committee. Mr. Jawari.
Oppose.
Ms. Atwin.
Opposed?
Mr. Baines.
No.
Mr. Kazmierczyk.
No.
Mr. Souza.
No.
Ms. Block.
Yes.
Mr. Jenis.
Yes.
Ms. Kuzi.
In favor.
Madame Vignola.
No.
Mr. Johns.
No.
2, 4, 5, 6, 7. 7 nays, 3 yeas.
Okay, 7 yeas or 7 nays.
7 nays. A's, 3
7 A's, 3 A's, so that is defeated. Can we go now to, well, I was hoping we could go to vote on what we all had disagreed on. Go ahead, Mr. Sousa.
You know, I think all of us share the deep concern that what happened in the House. We all recognize that it's something that we should have been better aware to not have had that exposed. So I think we all in agreement with that. But there is a piece of the submission that I think needs to be tweaked, because I think we all recognize that we want to get down to what occurred and how it should not have been, how it should not have happened, and not presuppose that there's some blame or that somehow someone did something wrong. That's why we want it to be reviewed. And I would amend the portion where we're saying that it was ignored. That presupposes that it was known. And I would amend that portion of the text.
Sorry, just a point of order. So,
Just, do you have different wording, Mr. Sousa, then? Because we can't just take out the word was ignored.
What?
Because it would say, or this individual's military record was ignored. So
No, the prior to
proper
that,
vetting was either not done, or this individual's military record was ignored.
that presupposes the vetting. So you're vetting to make certain that the person was understood.
Sorry, but maybe I misheard. I thought you said you wanted to take out the ignored.
Take out who he was. So basically saying that there wasn't proper vetting, and then go from there, and take out the portion of it that somehow we knew that he was a vet and that we purposely ignored his record, because you're presupposing that it was done. That's the issue that we're trying to get at.
Proper vetting was either not done on this individual's military record, or that it was ignored. So they're saying either the vetting wasn't done, or that it was done and his record was ignored.
Correct.
So you want the entire line taken out about
I say
the vetting?
proper vetting wasn't done. I think that's the important piece here.
Okay.
So take out either.
Let's see. Yeah, we'll get to you in a moment, Mr. Janos.
Either and then take out
So during the President of Ukraine's special address to Parliament on Friday, and that the proper vetting was not done on this individual's military record?
On this individual, any individual, right? We again are presupposing that was there any others in the home? Like make certain.
And that proper vetting wasn't done, period?
Or semicolon.
Keep
that
going.
the chair will go.
Oh, okay, semicolon, and then it goes into me writing. Was Mr. Generous and Mr. Johns?
okay, so I just don't see the problem with the existing language, because the existing language says that proper vetting was either not done or the individual's military record was ignored. In other words, either the research wasn't done or the research was done, but the results of that research were ignored. So the existing language, I think, is inclusive of all possibilities. It doesn't say his record was ignored. It said either the proper vetting wasn't done or his record was ignored. So I don't see the need for the change. I don't have a I mean it does seem like just sort of wordsmithing at this point, but I think the existing language is better.
I hear where Mr. Sosa is coming from. Look, we can all agree that there was no malice, intended here. This is a horrible, horrible mistake. And I think by removing, that this individual's military record was ignored, clearly, if anyone had identified this and connected the dots, this wouldn't happen. And if there was a proper vetting process in place, this never would have happened, which is the whole idea of the writing the letter to Proc, so that this never happens again and there's proper vetting in place and work to be done. So I would support Mr. Sousa's motion. I'm hoping we can try to figure this out here, because we're tying up the whole meeting on this, and it's important. I'm not saying it's not important. It really is. And again, I appreciate Ms. Kuzi bringing this motion here for us to really cement to Proc how important this is to all of us as members of Parliament and this committee. So I would support Mr. Souza's motion. I'm hoping we can all come to an agreement here to move things along.
I'm just going to have, Ms. Block, go ahead, and then I'm going to have our clerk just read what we think Mr. Souza has suggested.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I think it might be good for you to read that for me because what I think I heard is that we are going to keep in the letter that proper vetting wasn't done. And I think that is drawing a conclusion rather than leaving it open-ended, as my colleague Mr. Genuis has said. It's one or the other. They need to figure that out. I think Mr. Souza's motion or amendment is actually more limiting. Thank you.
Thanks, Ms. Block. I'm going to have, our clerk just read out what's Mr. Souza is proposing.
Sir, you
can let us know if it's
do
correct.
believe the word either might need to come out as well in order to make it make sense. So if you would just have me, I'll read from Friday, September 22nd. So from Friday, September 22nd, and that proper vetting was not done, semicolon, that the chair of OGO write to PROC to suggest that they create a subcommittee, and it goes on from there with the language that has already been agreed to by the committee. So it would strike either, and then it would strike or this individual's military record was ignored, and it would be closeted by a semicolon.
Is that correct, Mr. Souza? That's correct. Okay. Anyone else, colleagues? We vote on Mr. Souza's amendment, please. On division. Mr. Jouari? Are you fine? Fine. Mr. Souza's amendment will pass on division. Are we clear on the final motion, or should the clerk read out what we think is the final amended motion? We're fine? Great. So the final amended and sub-amended motion. Can we vote on that? On division, colleagues? Wonderful. On division, we will do up a letter, and I will make sure everyone receives a copy. Thank you very much. Ms. Block, you were waving at me, then Mr. Johns or Ms. Vinola. I didn't see who was first. Let's go to Ms. Block first, and then let me know who was first of the two of you. Ms. Block?
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. And I assume that this is the time in which we have opportunity to table motions that were circulated to our committee members as a result of the conversations that we had at subcommittee, that once we established an agenda dealing with the current studies that were ongoing, that we would then look to members to put motions on notice for future studies that they would like to see this committee undertake. And so with that, I would like to table a motion that was circulated to committee members on Tuesday. And look, in a recent announcement, the government announced that it was probing multiple companies that have allegedly been using Uyghur forced labor somewhere in their supply chain. These companies have allegedly been continuing to import goods which have used slave labor in their production process. And despite the international outcry and the condemnation from the Parliament of Canada, it seems that the Government of Canada has not taken the proper steps to ensure that goods produced using the products of forced labor are barred from entering the country. Additionally, members learned at recent hearings of this committee about government contracts with companies that engaged in unethical conduct, but were still allowed to obtain sole source contracts from the government and be cleared for multiple standing offers. I will note that the company in question, McKinsey, has recently reached yet another settlement of $230 million US dollars to resolve more lawsuits due to their role in the opioid crisis. This is in addition to an earlier $641.5 million in settlements paid out to resolve lawsuits. That a company such as McKinsey has access to exclusive government contracts is unacceptable. The two issues I mentioned, which should be violations of the integrity regime, have occurred under this government. Whether this is due to a lack of effectiveness of the current integrity regime or a lack of enforcement, neither are acceptable. With these issues in mind, I would like to move the following motion: that pursuant to Standing Order 1083C, the committee undertake a study of the integrity regime to review the effectiveness of the current rules and regulations to ensure that, one, the Government of Canada is not entering into contracts or real property agreements with suppliers that are conducting unethical business practices, and businesses which engage in unethical business practices are not able to undermine the fair competition and integrity of the Canadian economy, and that the use and expenditure of public funds is protected and safeguarded. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thanks, Ms. Block. The motion is in order. Does anyone wish to speak on this? Mr. Johns?
I'll be really quick. I think this is a great motion. Does Ms. Block want to include this, though, in the McKinsey study? Because there's a lot of stuff that could be woven in. If not,
Ms. Block, Mr. Johns was asking if you're including.
No, okay,
I didn't understand it that way.
Okay,
This is like a standalone.
I'm good with it.
Mr. Generous?
Yeah, Chair. I think this is a great study as well. I would just say, it'd be worthwhile for the committee to incorporate into this study evidence gathered from other studies. But I think when we're looking at the integrity regime specifically, there probably are specific issues we need to look at structurally around the integrity regime that's quite distinct from one particular company. But I think, if it's the will of the committee, we can take that evidence and use it in the work we'll do on this study as well. I think Canadians expect that when we're purchasing products, when the Government of Canada is purchasing products, they're not contributing to slavery, violence, injustices around the world. I think most people would expect that the government tries to stop those things, but at a minimum, that the government isn't complicit in those things through its procurement. And I think there's been a lot of credible concerns raised that we're not doing nearly enough in this regard. So I would very much welcome this study. Thanks.
Mr. Shawari?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thanks, Kelly, for this motion. A couple of clarifying questions, if Ms. Block can share with us. What are your thoughts of how many sessions, and when are you thinking about launching this? And I ask the question because, as you know, you were part of the subcommittee. We talked about the outsourcing. We talked about PPE, and we also talked about the fact that we have ministers coming, sub-Bs coming, and we also talked about the fact that next in the item of our studies, which we prioritized before, which is being delayed over and over and over again, is the I think 4 sessions on procurement diversity. So very much interested to know how many sessions you're thinking about and the timing of this. Thank you.
If I could interrupt just quickly before we get to how many meetings. Maybe you could just address the question of how many meetings, and I'm going to suggest perhaps if we can get to it and decide on it, we can look at the schedule among ourselves, among the subcommittee, and because I think there's another couple other motions we kind of want to get to. I don't know if it has to be decided immediately, but maybe the answer of how many meetings Ms. Block is thinking.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and through you to my colleague, whom, of course, is part of the subcommittee. I recognize absolutely that we have most of our meetings already established up until Christmas, perhaps, that there are other items that we would probably want to wrap up in this year. So without precluding any other conversations that we would have at a subcommittee, I would suggest this come before this committee in the new year, and, would hope that it is a priority study for us when we get back in 2024. The number of meetings, I did not put the number of meetings in. I'm open to negotiating that. And perhaps it's something that the subcommittee could even discuss when we next meet to look at the calendar going forward once we've completed everything that's on our agenda. I know that's not definitive, but I'm very much open to negotiating the number of meetings.
Perfect. Are we fine with that? Thank you very much. Ms. Block, I want to thank you for bringing that forward. Those of us who were on the committee, I think a couple of you were, when we looked at NUPTAC, which actually has a long and wide history of violating laws internationally, and we've still got a contract. So I'm looking forward to that one. Thank you very much, colleagues. Can we all agree to this? Perfect. So passed. Ms. Vignola, did you have... I think it was yourself, then Mr. Johns.
Je vais y aller rapidement.
Yes, I'll be quick. Given that the parliamentary budget officer cannot appear, we don't know if the 3rd will be cancelled or not, but I like to be prepared. And so I would suggest we have a meeting with certain officials about P8 and the CP-140 Aurora by the Boeing P-8 Poseidon. So we could have one meeting with officials, and if ever it's canceled, we can reassess things, but that's what I would suggest. So that, pursuant to Standing Order 1083C, the committee undertake a study on the upcoming replacement of the CP-140 Aurora by the Boeing P-8 Poseidon, and that the committee invite to appear at a meeting Mary Gregory, ADM of Industry, Simon Page, Troy Crosby, and Bill Matthews.
Can I just suggest, colleagues, we will, if we can get this agreed to, we will try. If we will not be able to get them for Tuesday, and again, as I mentioned, it's very iffy, but Tuesday afternoon, if we have to cancel it, leave it with us to cancel and reschedule it for another date. Just for context, this is in regards to the contract for the P8, the Boeing P8, and there was a bit of controversy about Canadian companies looking to put a bid on it. So this would just be a one-day? Perfect. Okay. Colleagues, are we comfortable with that? If we can for Tuesday, we will. Chances are we will not, but if we cannot, we will leave it to myself and the clerk to assign another day. Mr. Jory?
Yeah, supporting one day and supporting the officials coming in. So I'm okay with that, so long as this is one 2-hour meeting and it's the officials, correct?
Yep.
Okay. Yep.
Wonderful. Colleagues, thank you very much. I appreciate your flexibility with that. Mr. Johns, speak fast.
We're all dealing with the housing crisis, and we know that we're talking about it day in, day out. People are struggling, paying, astronomical rents. The developer-driven model hasn't worked. As Ms. Atwin got the butt end of me yesterday, I identified that the private sector has not solved the affordable housing crisis anywhere in the world, an affordable housing crisis. I understand the need for partnership, and I know that all parties around this table have talked about partnership to create affordable housing with government buildings, government lands, and I'd like to hear the spirit of that, because there is underutilized lands and buildings. It needs to be done with free, prior, and informed consent, and it must be done, in terms of, of inclusion with Indigenous peoples, those decisions. But we need to make sure we can't have a repeat of the Greenbelt, where public lands end up in developers' hands, and public lands actually belong in public hands. So we want to make sure that that happens. We had that happen in BC in the Crown lands that ended up in the private sector. So I want us to study it, and I'm going to move a motion that, pursuant to Standing Order 102, subsection 2, that the committee undertake a study. 1082, thank you. The committee undertake a study to identify opportunities within the Government of Canada's real property portfolio to build non-market housing, that the committee invite witnesses from the Treasury Board, Canada Mortgage and Housing Corporation, as well as the President of the Treasury Board and the Minister for Housing, Infrastructure and Communities, and that the study should be at least 4 meetings and that the committee report its findings to the House.
Mr. Genos?
Thank you, Chair. I thank Mr. Johns for putting forward a motion on an important issue. It is very much his right during committee business to propose any motion that he wants. But I would just respectfully ask if we can have a little bit more time on this one, because the notice did just come out this morning, and we'd like the opportunity to review the motion a little bit more and be able to come back to the committee with our proposed approach on it.
Mayor Chuck.
Yeah, I think Mr. Johns hit a home run with this proposal. We're ready to support this today. I would simply ask if Mr. Johns would be amenable to including on the list of witnesses the CEO of the Canada Lands Company, which is the CEO, the new CEO of the Canada Lands Company, which basically works with partners to develop the federal land holdings, and also to include Canada Post. There have been some really innovative solutions. I look at Aurelia, for example, where a Canada Post was maintained on the ground floor and affordable housing was built on top of the existing Canada Post building, to ask them to come in as well too. But again, I would ask that we consider when we're looking at federal lands and real holdings, that we include the Canada Lands Company, which is, I think, important, and also Canada Post as well too.
Thanks. We're going to open up speakers list for Mr. Kuzmierczuk's amendment. Mr. Johns, then Mr. Genos.
Order, can the amendment be read one more time?
Could you repeat that, Mr. Kuzmierczuk? And we'll go to Mr. Johns.
Yes, that we just add on. Yes, that we add for the list of witnesses. We add the CEO of the Canada Lands Company, and also that we also include witnesses from Canada Post that could speak to potential partnerships with Canada Post land holdings in terms of building affordable housing quickly. Example is Aurelia, but Canada Post and Canada Lands Company is what we're asking for.
Thanks. Appreciate you bringing up Canada Lands, because they have not been before OGO in about 6.5 years. Johns, did you want to talk on the proposed amendment?
I'm fine with the amendment. Hopefully everybody is.
Mr. Genos?
Sure. If there wasn't the appetite to give us more time, can we have just 2 or 3 minutes suspension and then come back? I think we can still get it. I think we still get it done by the end of the meeting.
Fine. We'll suspend for a few minutes as always. Standing Order 1083C. Thanks very much, sir. Mr. Jenis?
Thank you, Chair, and thank committee members for their indulgence. I don't entirely agree with Mr. John's framing initially. I think we should be talking about the problem caused by government gatekeepers that have prevented housing from getting built. But we're very happy to do a study of issues around housing. Of course, this is an important issue, and we're not voting to endorse everything he said. We're voting on the motion, so fair enough. I would just propose. I think first of all, what I think will pass by quickly is that we add after communities and other witnesses. Is there agreement on that? Yes. Okay, I think that's maybe implied, but.
No, we're on Mr. Kuzmierczuk's amendment, so.
Oh, okay.
Mr. Kuzmierczuk, I'm
Is
not
there
sure if you
unanimous?
heard.
Actually, I can ask for unanimous consent at any time. Is there
Sure.
unanimous consent
Yeah,
to add
Mr.
and other
Kuzmierczuk,
witnesses?
just as long as you're listening in.
I'm sorry, can you repeat that?
Go ahead, Mr. Jenis.
I'm just going to add the words and other witnesses after the witness list to make sure we're implying that members will submit witnesses.
Like, are we fine with Mr. Kuzmierczuk's amendment, and then we'll further amendment?
Yeah, we can adopt his amendment. We can add and other witnesses as well. Is that
Great.
agreeable?
So let's start on Mr. Kuzmierczuk's. Okay, I think I say everyone's in agreement with Mr. Kuzmierczuk's amendment, and then Mr. Jenis has a further one, just adding and others. Yeah. And we're all in agreement, colleagues?
And then I just had one more suggestion that we
Hold on just 2 secs, if you've got that. Yep.
Sorry, just as a clarification, we've
We've
CEO
added
of the Canada Land, we've added Canada,
Canada
Post,
Post
and then
and
we've added
others.
others.
So
Okay,
that's
great.
where we're standing
That's
right
fine.
now.
Just, yep.
Let's stop. Mr. Jenis, if you have others, let's put them all at once.
Okay, this is the last one. And report that. No, just kidding. A real property portfolio to build. I'm going to propose we add in market and before non-market housing. We're looking at a study to identify opportunities. We can look at the arguments for and against market and non-market housing, what's appropriate in what context, but I would suggest that in the context of the study, we look at the possibility, the opportunities for both, and that will provide sort of a broader look at the situation and the opportunities, and it will provide people with an opportunity to argue against market housing if that's their view. But let's look at it as well. Let's not exclude it from consideration. So it would be revised to read study to identify opportunities within the Government of Canada's real property portfolio to build market and non-market housing. Thanks.
Great. Just before we open it up, can I just mention quickly Canada Lands, and I appreciate what you're saying. We should consider Canada Lands does develop at market housing. So if we are inviting them, perhaps it can be that. I'm sure this subject will come up anyways, but just so we are aware that is part of what they do as well. Does anyone wish to bring I see Mr. Kuzmierczuk is in favor, but Mr. Johns, do you want to speak on it before we?
It'll be the only part we don't agree on. But so I'm fine with not agreeing on the market piece on the motion. I know I'll get defeated here, but
that's fine.
And I'm fine with that. So move it, then let's get it over with so we can get on to the main motion.
I agree, because there's a lot of aspects to the housing thing as well. I'd hate to exclude anything, but I appreciate that. Colleagues, can we do this on division? Mr. Jenis's suggestion to add the word "and market" on division, colleagues? Yep. Wonderful. We are good. Thank you for bringing that forward. Sorry, the main motion. On division as well, colleagues?
Yep.
So much division. So much division, yes, and yet we're still on. I'm sorry. Our colleagues with Liberals would like a recorded vote on the. We'll do a recorded vote on. We agreed to that one already, on division. Okay. As amended,
So sorry to disappoint you, Mr. Chair, but I'd like to move that we strike the ministers from the motion.
We're actually at the point where we're voting on the motion, the final motion as amended and everything else. So we're past some amendments.
Okay.
Good. We're doing a recorded vote. Madame?
Okay. On Mr. John's motion as amended, Mr. Jawari,
Yes.
Ms. Atwin,
Yes.
Mr. Baines,
Yes.
Mr. Kuzmierczak,
Yes. Very excited. Yes.
Mr. Souza,
I support.
Ms. Block,
Yes.
Mr. Dennis,
Yes.
Ms. Boozy,
In favor.
Madame Viola,
Oui.
Mr. Johns,
Yes.
and yes.
Colleagues, thank you very much. And please bear with me. Ms. Vignola has something very important. I'm not sure if we'll have time, but if Ms. Vignola would like to introduce the motion, if we can agree to it, wonderful. We will do so in the next 2 minutes. If not, we will have to save it for another meeting. Go ahead, Ms. Vignola.
Donc, rapidement, vous le savez.
So quickly, you know that we changed insurance companies over the summer, and several issues were raised by clients of the insurer. And so this motion is to try to understand what happened and what to avoid if we ever switch companies again. I'd also like to figure out if there are any solutions that we can already apply so that public servants don't find themselves in an administrative rabbit hole when they have to make a claim or find themselves on hold indefinitely, eternally, when we need to reach customer service. So, that pursuant to Standing Order 1083C, the committee undertake a study on the changeover of the Public Service Healthcare Plan, PSHCP, from Sun Life to the Canada Life Insurance Company, and that to do so, the committee examined matters including 1. The quality of the insurance coverage, taking into account the circumstances and needs of federal public service employees. 2. The efficiency and effectiveness of the new insurance plan, particularly as concerns the online claims service and the telephone service offered to participants and health professionals. 3. The mechanisms that Public Services and Procurement Canada used in awarding the PSHCP contract to ensure the contractor had the capacity to serve the entire federal public service and provide the expected services. And 4. The measures that will be taken to correct the situation. That the committee allocate at least 4 meetings to conduct the study, and that it invite to appear for 2 hours per panel the following witnesses. The Minister of Public Services and Procurement at the time the contract was awarded to Canada Life, the current minister and officials from Canada Life, and any other witnesses it deems necessary, and that the committee report its findings and recommendations to the House, and that, pursuant to Standing Order 109, the government table a comprehensive response. Apologies to the interpreters for reading so quickly. Now, a little bit like Ms. Block's motion, this can be done after Christmas, but I think we should look at this. Thank you.
Quick suggestion. Perhaps we'll get to that, and then we can either pass it or we'll adjourn. Mr. Jory?
Yeah. So we don't have any issue with the study. That's number 1. Number 2 is we don't think it's going to take 4 sessions. And what we'd like to do, we actually like to remove the minister and add the officials. And then after hearing that, then we can make a decision. So in Genesis, the what we are studying is fine. We're removing we're suggesting that it won't be 4 sessions. We start with 1 session, inviting the officials and everyone else, and based on that, then we'll decide.
Are you speaking on his amendment? proposed amendment or in something else, Mr. Genuis? Go ahead, sir.
So this is the direction. I don't know if we'll get it done in time, but look, my view is that if we're studying issues, it's important to hear from ministers. I've often found that with officials, they are in the unenviable position of needing to defend the government line without having been responsible for it. And that limits the kind of substantive dialogue that can advance. We can ask them technical questions, but we live in a system that's supposed to be based on ministerial responsibility, where ministers are responsible for decisions that are made by their departments and that they direct those decisions. So I am just fundamentally opposed to the idea that we would remove the opportunity to even briefly consult the ministers. If we're going to study an issue, let's have the spokesperson for the department, the person responsible for the department, address the committee. So I don't have a strong problem in principle with changing the number of meetings, but I would just underline that the issue of ministers is important for us. If we're gonna look at this issue, let's look at it properly.
Mr. Jouari?
Guys, there is no smoking gun here. There was a service contract that ended, and there was a bid for. There was an open bid. Nobody else but Canada Life bid on it, and that's how it moved. That's why I'm suggesting let the official come, answer the questions, all the questions that you've had, and if there is a smoking gun, we can go and have other meeting, call ministers and whatever we want, because there is a simple answer for this, and we can hear it from the officials. And if you're not convinced, then we can go. We can have a larger debate. We can have a much deeper conversation on that, but we are out of time. But that's really the genesis of it. There was a contract. The contract ended. There was an open bid. Nobody else but Canada Life bid. That's it.
Just very briefly, we do have commitment for the ministers for their mandate for 2 hours, as well as another hour for the estimates before first week December is up. So we will have that opportunity that way. It's just an FYI. Mr. Genuis?
Yeah, look, maybe there's a smoking gun and maybe there isn't. To be honest, this issue is not my area of expertise at all. I'm just saying if there's nothing to see here, then let's not do the study. And if there's something to see here, then let's have the people responsible come to the committee. So I think I would be inclined to support doing the study simply because if it's important to Ms. Vignola, I think it's fair for her to get one of her studies in the mix. But I think if we're going to do it, I would suggest including the ministers. And look, in terms, we've got a lot on our agenda, so we'll have the opportunity to ask some of these questions, maybe to ministers when they come on their mandate letters earlier. But we may not get to this study until well into the new year anyway. So at that time, it would be appropriate to have ministers back to explain on that specific issue and where things are at that point.
Kuzmierczak.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think there's a balance to be struck here, and I think my colleague, Mr. Jouari, has brought that balance forward. We want to hear, we want to do this study. We think it's important that Madame Vignola has brought forward. But at the same time, let's first hear from the officials. Let's get answers, basic answers, fundamental from them in terms of the nuts and bolts. If there is something we don't like there, then let's ask for ministers to come here. I'd rather our ministers focus right now their time on crises of climate change and crises of housing and others. And as much as I'd love to see them in committee meeting, I'd rather have their attention focused on those things. And so let's get officials in here first. Let's start the study, get officials in here. And then if there is something that is alarming or that requires further deeper dives and answers, then we call the ministers. I think Mr. Jouari strikes a very, very good balance for Madame Vignola.
Sorry, let me interrupt, sir. I think we're not getting the translation. What part did you miss?
Il y avait beaucoup d'écho dans.
There was a lot of echo when Mr. Kuzmicek was speaking. I don't know if he moved his headset.
Disons trois phrases de là où il était.
3 sentences ago, please.
Okay, Mr. Chair, let me try that again, and I'm going to keep this brief because I know we're running out of time here. But again, a balance. Is it okay, Madame Vignola? I just wanted to get a thumbs up from you. Are you hearing me clearly? Est-ce que c'est clair?
Yeah, we're good.
Okay, I wanted to say again that Mr. Johari, brought forward. He struck a balance here, wanting to get this important study rolling, wanting to hear from the officials, get the basic nuts and bolts of what happened here in this transition. And if there are any concerning points or questions that remain unanswered, then we invite the ministers here. I'd rather see our ministers focus on the issues at hand, the crises at hand of housing and climate change and others. As much as I'd love to see them here every single day and every single week, but I'd like them focused on those challenges that Canadians want to see them focused on. But again, like I said, I want to see this study move forward. Let's hear from the officials, and then if we need additional questions, then we call on the ministers. So I would ask Madame Vignola to kindly strike the ministers from that original motion at this point.
Ms. Vignola, you had your hand up, and then we're going to quickly run out of time here.
Je pense que mon libellé.
I think my wording is broad enough to be agreeable to everyone. I'm prepared to discuss the number of meetings, but there is a decision process that we need to take into account. I understand what my colleague is saying about the lack of choice, but isn't there anything else that could have been done? That's what I'm wondering. We're chasing the clock. I think maybe we should have a discussion together and then come back to this later with a proposal that is agreeable to everyone.
The colleagues said that you will get among yourselves and try and work this out.
Est-ce que j'ai besoin de pousser une...
Do I need to move a motion to adjourn on my own motion?
I will just adjourn the meeting. Colleagues, thanks. So we had some hiccups at the beginning, but we got through a lot. I appreciate that, and I appreciate if you could follow up with all sides with Ms. Vignola regarding her requests. Thank you very much, colleagues. We are adjourned.